The radio crackled with static, and then the words came through. Words that would haunt every Marine who heard them. All Overwatch assets. This is Vanguard actual. Basin is unsalvageable. I repeat, unsalvageable. Execute immediate withdrawal to Rally Point Kilo. Acknowledge and comply. Staff Sergeant Elena Reyes lay prone on the frozen ridge. Her cheek pressed against the stock of her MK-13 Mod 7 and felt the weight of those words settle into her chest like a stone. 3 miles below, in a basin carved from ancient rock and blanketed in 6 feet of snow, 1,000 Marines were about to die. She didn't move, didn't acknowledge, just watched through her Schmidt and Bender scope as the enemy fighters materialized along the eastern ridgeline, like shadows separating from the mountain itself. 200 meters to her left, hidden in a natural depression covered by white thermal netting, her younger sister heard the same transmission. Sergeant Maya Reyes keyed her radio once, a single burst of static, and Elena understood. No words were necessary. They'd been speaking without words since childhood, since the day their father's flag-draped coffin had been lowered into Virginia soil, since the moment Marine Corps liaison officer had explained that Gunnery Sergeant Miguel Reyes had been abandoned by command during an extraction that never came, left behind, just like the 1,000 Marines in that basin were about to be left behind. Overwatch 2-1. This is Vanguard actual. Acknowledge withdrawal order. How copy? Elena's finger found the power switch on her Mbita radio. She held it there, feeling the cold bite through her glove liner, feeling her pulse thrum against the frozen metal. Below, the first enemy mortar team was setting up on a rocky outcropping 600 meters from the basin's northern edge. She watched the fighter in a brown Parker wrestle an 82mm tube into position, while 2 others stacked rounds in the snow. Behind them, a squad leader was gesturing toward the basin, drawing firing solutions in the air with his hands. The math was simple. The enemy had the high ground. They had mortars, Pecan machine gun positions, at least 200 fighters spread across 3 ridgelines. The Marines had wounded soldiers, depleted ammunition, and a weather ceiling that had grounded every helicopter within 400 miles. Command was right. The basin was unsalvageable. But Command hadn't watched their father die because the general decided the risk wasn't worth the reward. Overwatch 2-1. Respond immediately. This is a direct order. Elena pressed the power switch down. The radio clicked off. The silence that followed was absolute. Just the wind, the creak of ice, and the distant sound of enemy fighters calling to each other in Pashto. She breathed out slowly, watching her breath crystallize in the -20-degree air, and then she settled her crosshairs on the mortar squad leader. If that opening hooked you, trust me, this story only gets more intense. Subscribe now for more real stories of courage, and hit that notification bell. Now, let me take you back to where it all began, 48 hours before 2 sisters shut down their radios and defied a direct order from United States Marine Corps Command. 2 days earlier, Forward Operating Base Viper sat on a plateau overlooking the Corango Valley, and Elena Reyes was doing what she did every morning, running target calculations while the rest of the base slept. The sniper hide she constructed on the eastern perimeter was nothing special, just a reinforced foxhole with a tarp stretched overhead and sandbags arranged to break up her silhouette. But it was hers, a place where the noise of the FOB faded, and the only thing that mattered was math. Distance, wind speed, temperature, humidity, elevation differential, the Coriolis effect, spin drift, the thousands of variables that determine whether a bullet traveling 2,000 feet per second would strike its target or sail harmlessly into the Afghan mountains. She was running calculations on a theoretical shot, 1,800 meters across a valley, accounting for a 12-mile-per-hour crosswind. When Maya's boots crunched through the frost behind her, "You're thinking about Dad again." Elena didn't turn around. "I'm thinking about ballistics." "Same thing." Maya settled into the foxhole beside her, their shoulders touching through layers of cold weather gear. At 26, Maya was 2 years younger, 3 inches shorter, and approximately 10 times more willing to say exactly what was on her mind. You always run long-range calculations when you're thinking about him, because long range is what kept him alive, until it didn't. Maya was quiet for a moment. Below them, the Corango Valley stretched into darkness, a river of shadow between mountain walls that had swallowed empires. The Soviet dead still haunted these ridges. So did the British dead from a century before that. And now American dead joined them, their blood frozen into the same ancient stone. Intel briefing at 0600, Maya said finally, something big. Hartwell's pulling in all sniper teams. Lieutenant Colonel James Hartwell commanded the 2nd Battalion, 8 Marines, 1,000 men and women who'd been pushing into Taliban-controlled territory for 3 months. He was a hard man, forged in Fallujah and tempered in Helmand, but Elena had seen something in his eyes during the last briefing that she recognized. The look of a commander who knew his luck was running thin. How big? Elena asked. Big enough that they're activating the QRF at Camp Leatherneck. Elena finally looked at her sister. Maya's face was painted with the same cold weather camouflage that Elena wore, white and gray stripes breaking up her features. But her eyes were sharp with concern. You think they're pushing into the upper valley, Elena said. It wasn't a question. Maya nodded slowly. The Karengals chewed up every unit that's tried to hold it, and now Hartwell wants to push deeper. The elders are saying there's a weapons cache somewhere in the northern basin. HVTs moving through. Maybe even Al-Qaeda leadership. Based on what intel? Satellite imagery. SIGINT intercepts. The usual. Elena turned back to her scope, but she wasn't seeing the valley anymore. She was seeing a briefing room 12 years ago, where a colonel had explained to a room full of brass that Gunnery Sergeant Miguel Reyes and his reconnaissance team had been correctly abandoned because satellite imagery indicated overwhelming enemy presence and SIGINT intercepts suggested an ambush. The satellite imagery had been wrong. The intercepts had been misinterpreted, and her father had died in a valley not so different from this one, waiting for helicopters that never came. Elena, she blinked, refocusing on Maya's face. I know what you're thinking, Maya said, but Hartwell isn't like those officers. He's a good commander. All commanders are good until the math doesn't work out. Elena began breaking down her rifle, her movements automatic after thousands of repetitions. Then they make the same calculation everyone makes. Is it worth risking more lives to save the ones already lost? And the answer is always no. The answer is always no. The sisters sat in silence as the first gray light of dawn crept over the mountains. Somewhere in the distance, a helicopter's rotors beat against the thin air. I see 47 Chinook bringing supplies or carrying wounded. The sound was constant at FOB Viper. The rhythm of war. We should get to the briefing, Maya said finally. Elena finished breaking down her rifle and secured it in its drag bag. As she stood, her knees popping from cold and compression, she looked out over the valley one last time. Whatever they're planning, she said quietly, it's going to go wrong. Operations in the Karengal always go wrong. That's why they need us. That's why they need us. The command building at FOB Viper was a squat concrete structure reinforced with HESCO barriers and topped with communication arrays that bristled like metal thorns. Inside, the briefing room was standing room only. Platoon commanders, fire support officers, intelligence analysts, and in the back, where snipers always stood, Elena and Maya Reyes. Lieutenant Colonel Hartwell stood at the front of the room, his weathered face illuminated by the glow of a tactical display screen. At 52, he was old for a battalion commander, but the Marines under his command didn't see age when they looked at him. They saw the silver star on his chest, the purple heart beside it, and the steady presence of a man who brought more Marines home alive than any officer in the regiment. Gentlemen, ladies, his voice was gravel and authority. 48 hours ago, SIGINT intercepted communications from a high-value target we've been tracking for 11 months. Codename, Mountain Wolf. The room shifted. Mountain Wolf. The name sent a ripple of tension through the assembled Marines. He was a shadow, a Taliban commander who'd orchestrated ambushes that had killed 17 Americans in the past year. No one had ever seen his face. No one knew his real name, but everyone knew his work. Analysis indicates Mountain Wolf is personally overseeing a weapons transfer in the Karengal Basin. Hartwell touched the display, and a satellite image appeared. A frozen valley surrounded on 3 sides by jagged peaks. The basin is approximately 2 miles across, with steep terrain features providing natural defensive positions. Local assets confirm significant enemy presence on the surrounding ridgelines. Captain Marcus Chun, the battalion's intelligence officer, stepped forward. Elena knew Chin from a previous deployment, a competent officer with a gift for pattern analysis, but a blind spot for ground truth. Sir, the imagery shows movement consistent with heavy weapons. Likely DSHK emplacements, possible ZPU, for anti-aircraft positions. The enemy knows we want this cache. They're digging in, which is exactly why we need to move fast. Hartwell's jaw tightened. Command has approved a battalion-level push into the basin. We secure the cache, we eliminate Mountain Wolf, and we break the back of Taliban operations in this sector. Elena's chest constricted. A battalion push. 1,000 Marines moving into a frozen kill zone. Sir, a voice in the front row. Captain Diana Vance, Commander Bravo Company. What about air support? Weather forecasts show a front moving in. If we get pinned down, we'll have a 4-hour window before the weather closes in, Hartwell said. That's enough time to establish a perimeter and dig in. Once the front passes, air assets will be on station. And if the front doesn't pass? Vance pressed. Hartwell was silent for a moment. When he spoke, his voice was quieter, but no less certain. Then we hold until it does. The briefing continued: logistics, fire support plans, casualty evacuation procedures. But Elena had stopped listening. She was studying the satellite imagery, tracing the contours of the basin with her eyes, calculating angles and distances with a part of her brain that never turned off. 3 ridgelines overlooking the basin, natural choke points at the northern and southern entrances, limited cover for a force trying to establish defensive positions. It was a kill box. Anyone with tactical experience could see it. The basin was designed by geography to trap an attacking force and destroy from above. And yet, here they were, planning to march 1,000 Marines into its jaws. Maya's hand found Elena's in the crowd. A squeeze, a silent message. I see it too. After the briefing, as officers filed out to prepare their units, Elena approached Hartwell. He was rolling up maps, his movement precise and economical. When he sensed her presence and looked up, Staff Sergeant Reyes. His eyes flickered to Maya, standing a step behind. Both Sergeant Reyes. Something on your mind? Sir, the basin terrain concerns me. Hartwell's expression didn't change. Concerns you how? The ridgelines provide dominant overwatch positions. If the enemy has pre-positioned heavy weapons, Captain Chen's analysis suggests they haven't had time to establish fixed positions. Satellite imagery isn't always accurate, sir. Something shifted in Hartwell's eyes. A flicker of recognition, perhaps, or memory. Elena knew he'd read her service record, which meant he knew about her father. Staff Sergeant, I understand your concerns. His voice softened fractionally. I share them, but we have orders and we have a window. Mountain Wolf won't stay in that basin forever, and if the intelligence is wrong, then we adapt. Hartwell rolled the last map and secured it. That's what Marines do. We adapt, we overcome, and we bring our people home. He paused, meeting Elena's gaze. I'm assigning you and your sister to Overwatch Position 2-1, Southeast Ridge, 3 miles from the basin. You'll provide long-range support for the northern approach. 3 miles. At that distance, in those conditions, effective shots would be near impossible. They'd be observers, not participants, watching through scopes as the battle unfolded below. Sir, that's the assignment, Staff Sergeant. Hartwell's tone brooked no argument. You see something we need to know about, you report it. You have shots within your capability envelope. You take them. Otherwise, you observe and report. Clear. Clear, sir. Good. Briefing for sniper teams is at 1400. Dismiss. Elena and Maya exited the command building into the bitter morning air. The sun was fully up now, casting long shadows across the FOB, but provided no warmth. At this altitude in February, the sun was just another cold light in a cold sky. He knows, Maya said quietly as they walked. He knows the basin is dangerous. You can see it in his eyes. Knowing doesn't matter. Orders matter. That's not fair. That's not supposed to be fair. That's the military. Elena quickened her pace, her boots crunching through frozen mud. We have 6 hours to prepare our equipment. Let's not waste them. The sniper team briefing at 1400 confirmed what Elena had suspected. She and Maya would be the only Overwatch assets assigned to the southeast ridge. Other sniper teams would be embedded with the maneuvering companies, providing close support, but Overwatch Position 2-1 was isolated, 3 miles from the basin, exposed ridge, no quick extraction route. The briefing officer, a young lieutenant who'd never seen combat, rattled off coordinates and call signs with mechanical efficiency. Elena memorized everything while simultaneously calculating alternative positions, fallback routes, and fields of fire that the briefing didn't cover. When the briefing ended, she caught Maya's arm. We need to scout the position before the main force moves. That's not in the plan. The plan is wrong. They requested and received permission to insert early, citing concerns about establishing concealed positions before enemy observation increased. By 1600, they were in the back of a UH-60 Black Hawk, watching FOB Viper shrink to a cluster of lights as the helicopter banked toward the mountains. The flight lasted 43 minutes. 43 minutes of rotor noise and wind blast and the smell of aviation fuel. 43 minutes during which Elena reviewed every detail of the operation, searching for flaws she knew existed. The pilot set them down on a rocky shelf 2 kilometers from their designated Overwatch position. As the Black Hawk lifted away, its rotors vanishing into the gray sky, the silence that followed was absolute. 2 clicks, Maya said, checking her GPS, northeast bearing. Elevation gain of about 800 feet. Elena shouldered her ruck, 60 pounds of equipment, ammunition, and survival gear, and started moving. Maya fell behind her, their footsteps muffled by the deep snow. They moved in silence, communicating through hand signals developed over years of working together. Elena on point, reading the terrain. Maya covering their rear, watching for movement on the surrounding slopes. The mountains here were ancient and hostile, their faces scarred by centuries of wind and ice. Every ridgeline could hide a fighter. Every shadow could contain an ambush. But the sisters moved with the confidence of operators who'd spent years learning how to read the land. By 1900, they'd reached Overwatch Position 2-1. The position was a natural depression on the southeast ridge, sheltered from the wind by a rock outcropping, and providing a clear field of fire across the basin below. In summer, it might have been beautiful, a vista of valleys and peaks stretching toward the Pakistani border. In February, it was a frozen wasteland, the basin floor buried under snow that glittered like broken glass in the fading light. Good position, Maya admitted as they began setting up. Clear sight lines. Concealed approach. Too good. Elena was scanning the surrounding terrain through her spotting scope. If we can see this position's value, so can the enemy. We need to establish a secondary hide. They spent the next 3 hours constructing 2 separate positions. The primary hide in the natural depression and a secondary hide 200 meters to the west, concealed beneath a rocky overhang. Each position was camouflaged with white thermal netting, snow, and dead brush until it was virtually invisible for more than 50 meters. By 2300, they were in position. The basin spread out below them, 3 miles of frozen silence. In 12 hours, 1,000 Marines would march into that silence, and whatever was waiting for them would wake up. Get some rest. Elena told her sister, I'll take first watch. You won't sleep anyway. Then I'll pretend to sleep while you pretend to watch. Same as always. Maya's laugh was soft, barely audible above the wind. She settled into her sleeping bag, pulling the hood down until only her eyes were visible. Elena, yeah. Whatever happens tomorrow, we stick together. Right? Elena didn't answer immediately. She was watching the basin, watching the darkness, watching for movement that might signal early enemy reconnaissance. We stick together, she said finally. Always. The night passed slowly, measured in temperature drops and wind gusts and the occasional distant crack of ice shifting on the mountains. At 0430, movement began in the basin. Not enemy movement, American. The battalion's lead elements were approaching from the south, dark shapes against the snow, moving in tactical formation toward the basin's entrance. Elena keyed her radio, breaking silence for the first time since they'd inserted. Vanguard Actual, this is Overwatch 2-1. We have visual on friendly forces approaching from the south. Basin appears clear. Over. Copy, Overwatch 2-1. Maintain observation. Report any enemy contact. Roger. Vanguard. 2-1 out. She watched through her scope as the Marines entered the basin. Company by company, platoon by platoon, 1,000 soldiers spreading across the frozen ground like dark water flowing into a bowl. They moved well, disciplined and professional, establishing perimeter positions and security points with practiced efficiency. By 0600, the entire battalion was inside the basin, and then the weather rolled in. Elena saw it coming, a wall of gray sweeping down from the peaks, swallowing ridgelines and valleys in its path. Within 30 minutes, visibility dropped to less than 100 meters. The basin vanished beneath a blanket of clouds and blowing snow. Vanguard Actual, this is Overwatch 2-1. Weather is closing in faster than projected. Visibility is severely limited. Recommend immediate. Copy 2-1. We're aware. Air assets are returning to base. We'll hold until the front passes. Elena's jaw tightened. Hold until the front passes. The same words Hartwell had used in the briefing. But weather forecasts in the Hindu Kush were educated guesses at best. This front could pass in 4 hours or 4 days. 1,000 Marines trapped in a frozen bowl with no air support. Movement. Maya's voice was sharp. Eastern ridgeline. Multiple contacts. Elena swung her scope toward the east, through the swirling snow. She could just make out shapes materializing along the ridge. Dark figures against white, moving with purpose. Count them. 20, 30. I'm seeing at least 50, and they're still coming. Western Ridge. Maya shifted her spotting scope. More movement. Similar numbers. They were already in position. They were waiting for the weather. Vanguard Actual. This is Overwatch 2-1. Enemy contact. Eastern and Western Ridge lines. Estimate 100 plus fighters in elevated positions. They're bracketing the basin. Over. Static. Then Hartwell's voice, stripped of its earlier confidence. Copy 2-1. We see them. All units. This is Vanguard Actual. Prepare for contact. Dig in and establish defensive positions. The first mortar round landed at 0642. It struck the northern edge of the basin with sound like thunder, sending a geyser of snow and frozen earth into the air. The second round followed 5 seconds later. Then the third. Then the fourth. The enemy had bracketed the basin perfectly. Their mortars were walking across the American positions with deadly precision, and the Marines couldn't see well enough to return effective fire. 2-1, this is Vanguard. Can you identify mortar positions? We need counter-battery solutions. Elena scanned the surrounding ridges desperately. The snow was too thick. The enemy positions were too well concealed. Negative, Vanguard. Visibility is compromised. I cannot wait. A break in the wind. A momentary gap in the swirling white. I have visual on mortar team. Eastern Ridge, bearing 085. Range approximately 1,400 meters. Can you engage? 1,400 meters. In these conditions, wind gusting to 30 miles per hour, visibility fluctuating, extreme cold affecting ballistic performance. It would be an impossible shot. I can try. Elena settled behind her rifle, making rapid adjustments to her scope. Maya read wind calls from the spotting scope. Her voice calm despite the chaos unfolding below. Wind full value. Left to right. 12 to 15 miles per hour. Gusting to 20. Elena adjusted. Range 1420. Elevation differential plus 400. Adjusted again. Send it when ready. Elena exhaled slowly, finding the stillness between heartbeats. The mortar team was a cluster of dark shapes against white, for fighters working to drop rounds as fast as they could load them. She couldn't see faces at this distance, just movement, just targets. She squeezed the trigger. The rifle bucked against her shoulder. The round left the barrel at 2,800 feet per second, immediately fighting against the wind and the cold and the thin mountain air. 1.3 seconds later, the mortar team's loader pitched backward and didn't move. Hit! Maya's voice was tight with controlled excitement. Good hit. They're scattering. But there were more mortar teams, more machine gun positions, More fighters and 2 snipers could possibly engage, and the Marines in the basin were dying. The next 3 hours were a nightmare of fragmented contacts and desperate fire missions. Elena and Maya engaged targets as they became visible. Squad leaders directing fighters, machine gunners suppressing American positions, mortar crews raining death into the basin. Each shot was a calculation, a prayer, a hope that physics would cooperate. Some shots connected, some didn't. The wind was capricious, the visibility inconsistent, and the enemy was learning to stay concealed. By 0930, the situation had deteriorated from bad to catastrophic. Vanguard Actual, this is Overwatch 2-1. Enemy fighters are massing on the northern ridge. I count at least 60 in prepared positions. They're staging for an assault. Copy, 2-1. We're seeing movement to the south as well. They're going to hit us from multiple directions. What's the status on air support? A pause. When Hartwell's voice returned, it carried the weight of a man delivering a death sentence. Air support is grounded. Weather window is not opening. Estimated 12 to 18 hours before visibility improves. 12 to 18 hours. The Marines in that basin didn't have 12 to 18 minutes. Sir, request permission to displace to a closer position. We can provide more effective support from. Negative, 2-1. Maintain current position. You displace, you risk enemy contact, and you leave us blind. Sir, that's an order, Staff Sergeant. Maintain position and continue fire support. Vanguard out. Elena released the radio and closed her eyes. Below, in the basin, she could see the small figures of Marines scrambling between positions, try to establish cover against an enemy that surrounded them. She could see the dark stains in the snow where wounded soldiers had fallen. She could see the muzzle flashes of desperate return fire that couldn't reach the elevated enemy positions. Elena, Maya's voice was quiet. What do we do? Before Elena could answer, her radio crackled again, but it wasn't Hartwell's voice. It was Captain Chun, the intelligence officer, broadcasting on the command frequency. All Overwatch assets. This is Vanguard 2. Satellite imagery has confirmed what we suspected. The intelligence was flawed. Enemy force strength is estimated at 300 plus, with heavy weapons across multiple positions. Command is evaluating options. Elena knew what that meant. Command was doing the math, calculating whether it was worth risking additional assets to save the Marines trapped in that basin. The same calculation that had killed her father. Vanguard 2, this is Overwatch 2-1. What options are being evaluated? Over. Silence. Vanguard 2 respond. More silence. Then, finally, a voice she recognized. Captain Marcus Chun, speaking carefully, as if every word was being recorded. 2-1. Be advised that command is discussing withdrawal protocols for Overwatch assets. You may receive orders to extract to Rally Point Kilo. How copy? Withdrawal. They were going to pull the sniper teams and leave the battalion to die. Negative copy. Vanguard 2. We are in active fire support contact. Withdrawal would. 2-1. That's not a suggestion. Stand by for orders. The radio went dead. Elena looked at Maya. Her sister's face was pale beneath the camouflage paint, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and fury. They're going to leave them, Maya whispered, just like Dad. Maybe not. Maybe they're just... Don't. Maya's voice cracked. Don't pretend. I saw Chen's face at the briefing. He knew the intel was bad. They all knew. And now they're going to cut their losses and let 1,000 Marines die because the math doesn't work out. Elena wanted to argue, wanted to believe that the Marine Corps she'd dedicated her life to wouldn't abandon its own. But she'd seen this before. She'd lived through the aftermath of this exact scenario, holding her mother's hand at Arlington National Cemetery while a bugler played taps for a father who'd been left behind. The radio crackled. All Overwatch assets. This is Vanguard Actual. Basin is unsalvageable. I repeat, unsalvageable. Execute immediate withdrawal to Rally Point Kilo. Acknowledge and comply. Elena felt the words hit her like bullets. Unsalvageable. 1,000 Marines, reduced to a single clinical word. Overwatch 2-3, acknowledged, withdrawing. Overwatch 2-7, acknowledged, moving to rally point Kilo. One by one, the sniper teams acknowledged the order and began their extraction. One by one, the Overwatch positions went dark. Overwatch 2-1. This is Vanguard Actual. Acknowledge withdrawal order. How copy? Elena's hand was on the radio. Her finger was on the transmit button. She could feel Maya watching her, waiting, barely breathing. Below, in the basin, the Marines were fighting for their lives. Machine gun fire crackled across the frozen air. Mortar rounds continued to fall. And on the ridgelines, the enemy was massing for a final assault that would sweep through the American positions like a scythe through wheat. Overwatch 2-1. Respond immediately. This is a direct order. Elena pressed the power switch down. The radio clicked off. What are you doing? Maya's voice was barely a whisper. What Dad would have done. Elena looked at her sister, her eyes hard with determination. What every Marine is supposed to do. We don't leave our people behind. Elena, if we disobey a direct order, then we disobey a direct order. They can court-martial us when this is over, if we're still alive. She began checking her rifle, her movements quick and efficient. You don't have to stay. You can extract to the rally point. No one would blame you. Maya was silent for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was steady. Dad would be ashamed of me if I left you here alone. Dad would want you safe. Dad would want us to be Marines. Maya began checking her own rifle. So let's be Marines. The plan came together in fragments, shaped by desperation and honed by years of training. 2 snipers against 300 fighters. It was suicide by any reasonable calculation, but reasonable calculations had killed their father. Maybe unreasonable actions could save these Marines. We need to split positions, Elena said, studying the terrain through her scope. If we stay together, they can pinpoint our location and eliminate us with concentrated fire. But if we separate, we create the illusion of a larger force. Exactly. You take the secondary hide. I'll stay here. We coordinate our shots to hit different sectors simultaneously. One target from the east, one from the west. They won't know how many snipers they're facing. And when they figure it out, we improvise. Maya gathered her equipment and began moving toward the secondary position. Before she disappeared into the snow, she looked back. Elena, yeah, if we die up here, it was worth it. You know that, right? Elena felt something tighten in her chest. Love and fear and pride all tangled together. We're not going to die. We're going to save those Marines, and then we're going to face whatever charges command wants to throw at us, and we're going to do it together. Maya nodded once, then vanished into the white. Elena returned to her scope. The enemy was moving now, fighters flowing down from the ridgelines, preparing for the final assault. She could see squad leaders coordinating movement, radio men relaying orders, machine gun crews repositioning to provide covering fire. The assault would come at dawn. Standard Taliban doctrine. They'd use the first light to their advantage, attacking out of the rising sun to blind the defenders. That gave her 3 hours. 3 hours to cause enough chaos to delay the assault. 3 hours to keep those Marines alive until something changed, until the weather broke, until reinforcement arrived, until the miracle that seemed impossible suddenly became possible. She settled behind her rifle and began selecting targets. The first shot struck a squad leader on the eastern ridge at 1,300 meters. He'd been standing on a rocky outcropping, gesturing to his fighters, when Elena's round caught him in the chest. He spun and fell, tumbling down the slope until he came to rest against a snow-covered boulder. Before his body stopped moving, Maya's rifle cracked from 200 meters away, a shot that dropped a radio man on the western ridge. The man had been lifting a handset to his ear when the bullet found him. He collapsed in a spray of crimson that stained the snow. The enemy's response was immediate. Fighters scattered for cover, uncertain where the shots had come from. Officers screamed orders. Machine guns opened fire, raking the ridgelines with suppressive bursts that struck nothing but rock and ice. Elena was already shifting to her next target, a PCAM gunner who'd set up in a depression overlooking the basin. She adjusted for wind, for temperature, for the slight vibration of her own heartbeat, and squeezed the trigger. The gunner's head snapped back. His loader grabbed the weapon and tried to continue firing, but Maya's next shot caught him in the shoulder, spinning him away from the gun. 2 minutes for confirmed kills, and the enemy still didn't know where they were. The next hour was a masterclass in precision violence. Elena and Maya worked in perfect synchronization, their shots timed to create maximum confusion. Elena would fire from the east. 3 seconds later, Maya would fire from the west. Then Elena would shift to a southern angle, while Maya engaged targets to the north. To the enemy, it seemed like they were facing a full sniper platoon, shooters positioned across the entire ridgeline, each one deadly accurate. The chaos was exactly what Elena had intended. Squad leaders fell before they could organize assaults. Machine gun positions were silenced before they could suppress the Marines in the basin. Mortar crews abandoned their tubes and scattered for cover, unwilling to stand exposed while invisible death sought them out. By 0500, the enemy's assault preparations had ground to a halt. Fighters huddled behind rocks and in shallow depressions, afraid to move, afraid to expose themselves to the phantom snipers that haunted the ridges. But Elena knew it couldn't last. They're adapting. Maya's voice came through the short-range radio they'd switched to, a tactical frequency the enemy wasn't monitoring. I'm seeing organized movement on the eastern slope. Fire teams moving in bounds. They're trying to locate our positions. Same on the western approach. They're being methodical now. How long do we have? Elena watched the enemy teams advancing, using terrain for cover, leapfrogging forward, while others provided overwatch. Maybe an hour. They'll narrow down our general area, then hit us with everything they have. What do? Keep shooting. Buy as much time as we can. The next 30 minutes were a deadly game of cat and mouse. Elena engaged the advancing teams, forcing them back with accurate fire, while Maya did the same on her side. But with each engagement, the enemy learned more about their positions. With each shot, the circle tightened. At 0542, the first mortar round landed near Elena's position. The explosion sent snow and rock fragments showering across her hide. Elena pressed herself flat, her ears ringing, as a second round struck 20 meters away. They'd found her general location. Elena! Maya's voice was panicked through the radio. Are you hit? Negative, but they've got me bracketed. I need to displace. Move to the tertiary position. I'll cover. Elena grabbed her drag bag and rolled out of the hide, keeping low as mortar rounds continued to fall. Behind her, she heard Maya's rifle crack. One shot, then another, engaging the mortar crew to buy her time. She sprinted through the snow, her lungs burning in the thin air, and dug behind a boulder as another round exploded where her hide had been. Shrapnel whined overhead. The concussion pressed against her chest like a giant hand. For a moment, she lay still, gasping, counting her heartbeats. Then she forced herself up and crawled to a new position, a rocky crack she'd identified during their initial reconnaissance, smaller than the others but harder to spot. I'm set, she radioed. What's your status? Mortar team is down, but I've got infantry moving on my position. 8 to 10 fighters. I can see them about 400 meters out. Can you displace? Not without exposing myself to their overwatch. I'm going to have to fight. Elena swung her scope toward Maya's position. Through the swirling snow, she could see the dark shapes of enemy fighters advancing in a tactical line, using rocks and depressions for cover. Maya was right. There was no safe extraction route. I'll support from here. Take them as they come into your engagement range. I'll handle the flankers. The next 10 minutes were the most intense of Elena's life. Maya engaged the lead elements as they crested a small ridge. 3 quick shots that dropped 3 fighters and sent the others scrambling for cover. Elena caught a flanker trying to circle around to Maya's left, dropping him at 1,100 meters with a round that punched through his chest. The enemy returned fire. Wild bursts from AK-47s that cracked overhead and tore into the rocks around Maya's position. But they couldn't locate her hide, and every time a fighter exposed himself to maneuver, one of the sisters put him down. When engagement ended, 11 enemy fighters lay dead in the snow. The survivors had retreated, carrying their wounded, unwilling to advance further against the unseen killers. Maya, report. I'm okay. Took some rock fragments, but nothing serious. A pause. Elena, look at the basin. Elena shifted her scope. In the gray light of approaching dawn, she could see the Marines in the basin. They were still there, still fighting, still holding, still alive. The enemy assault that should have overrun them hours ago had never materialized. They bought time. Not enough, never enough, but some. Vanguard Actual, if you can hear this, hold on. Elena whispered the words to no one, knowing the Marines below couldn't hear her. We're not leaving you. The next 90 minutes were a grind. The enemy had given up trying to locate the snipers. The casualties were too high, the frustration too complete. Instead, they'd fallen back to their elevated positions and resumed the mortar bombardment, trying to destroy the Marines through indirect fire alone. But without forward observers willing to expose themselves, their accuracy suffered. Rounds fell across the basin, some striking near American positions, most exploding harmlessly in empty snow. The Marines used a respite to treat wounded, redistribute ammunition, and strengthen their defensive lines. At 0715, Elena noticed something that made her heart skip. Maya, the weather. I see it. The gray blanket that had smothered the mountains was beginning to lift. Patches of blue sky appeared between the clouds. The wind, which had been howling for hours, began to ease. If the weather clears. Air support. Maya's voice was electric with hope. The helicopters can fly. Elena keyed her silent radio, the one she'd shut off to disobey orders, and turned it back on. Vanguard Actual, this is Overwatch 2-1. Do you copy? Static. Then, incredibly, Hartwell's voice, ragged with exhaustion but still commanding. 2-1? We thought you'd extracted. Negative, sir. We're still on station. Advise that weather appears to be breaking. Request immediate air support coordination. A pause. When Hartwell spoke again, there was something in his voice that Elena couldn't quite identify. Something that sounded almost like gratitude. 2-1, you're crazy, but I'm glad you are. Stand by. I'm contacting command now. The next 20 minutes were the longest of Elena's life. She watched the weather continue to clear, watched the enemy fighters on the ridgelines preparing for another assault, watched the Marines in the basin clutching their weapons and waiting for the hammer to fall. Then, faintly at first but growing stronger, she heard it. Rotors. The unmistakable thump of helicopter blades cutting through thin mountain air. Vanguard Actual, this is Eagle Flight. We are inbound your position with 2 AH, 64 Apaches, and 4 UH, 60 Blackhawks. Request sitrep and target identification. The enemy heard the helicopters too. Elena watched as fighters scramble from their positions. Some tried to set up the ZPU, 4 anti-aircraft gun they'd hidden beneath a camouflage net. Others running for the cover of the rocky crevasses that dotted the ridgelines. Eagle Flight, this is Overwatch 2-1. I have eyes on enemy anti-aircraft position. Eastern Ridge, bearing 092, range 1,400 meters from my position. Recommend immediate engagement. Copy 2-1. Engaging now. The first Apache came over the ridge like an angel of death, its chain gun already spinning up. A stream of 30mm rounds tore into the anti-aircraft position, shredding the gun and its crew in a hurricane of fire. The second Apache banked east, engaging the mortar positions that had been hammering the basin for hours. Behind them, the Blackhawks descended toward the basin, their door gunners opening fire on any fighter foolish enough to break cover. Maya, Elena's voice cracked. Look at that. I'm looking. The enemy's careful assault preparations dissolved into chaos. Fighters who'd been massing for a final push scattered under the Apache's guns. Mortar crews abandoned their weapons and ran. Machine gun positions went silent as their operators fled or died. In 20 minutes, it was over. The Blackhawks touched down in the basin, loading wounded Marines aboard while fresh troops rappelled from hovering aircraft to reinforce the perimeter. The Apaches circled overhead, hunting for any enemy fighters stupid enough to stay and fight. Elena watched it all through her scope, feeling the tension drain from her body like water from a broken vessel. They'd done it, against all odds, against direct orders, against every calculation that said it was impossible. They'd held long enough for salvation to arrive. Overwatch 2-1, this is Vanguard Actual. Go ahead, sir. I don't know what to say, Staff Sergeant. You disobeyed a direct order. You risked your life and your sister's life. You could have been killed up there. Yes, sir. You saved 1,000 Marines. Elena closed her eyes. For a moment, she was 8 years old again, standing at Arlington, watching her father's coffin descend into the earth, hearing the rifles fire, feeling her mother's hand squeeze hers so tight it hurt. We just did what Marines are supposed to do, sir. I know. Hartwell's voice was heavy with emotion. Your father will be proud. Elena couldn't respond. She tried, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, she just keyed the radio twice. 2 clicks of static that meant everything and nothing. Get down here, Hartwell continued. We got wounded that need evac, and there's a Black Hawk with your name on it. We'll sort out the rest later. Copy, sir. Moving now. Elena gathered her equipment and began the descent. 200 meters away, Maya emerged from her hide and did the same. They met at the base of the ridge, both exhausted, both splattered with mud and snow, both wearing the 1,000-yard stares of soldiers who'd seen too much. Neither spoke. They just fell into step beside each other and walked toward the basin, toward the helicopters, toward whatever came next. The extraction took 3 hours. 3 hours of loading wounded onto Blackhawks, redistributing ammunition, and establishing security for the reinforcement units that had pushed them behind the helicopters. 3 hours during which Elena and Maya worked alongside the Marines they'd saved, carrying stretchers and checking bandages and doing whatever needed to be done. No one asked why 2 snipers who'd been ordered to extract were still on the mountain. No one questioned their presence. The Marines were too exhausted for questions, and the officers were too busy managing the aftermath. By noon, the basin was secured. The enemy had fled into the mountains, leaving behind their dead and their heavy weapons. The weapons cache that had justified the entire operation was located, inventoried, and photographed. Mountain Wolf was not among the dead. The shadow had slipped away again, as shadows always did. Elena and Maya were evacuated on the last Black Hawk out, crammed between wounded Marines and medical supplies. The flight back to FOB Viper took 47 minutes. 47 minutes during which neither sister spoke, both too tired to do anything but stare out the window at the mountains sliding past below. When the helicopter touched down, a military police escort was waiting. Staff Sergeant Elena Reyes. Sergeant Maya Reyes. You're to come with us. Elena looked at the MPs, 2 young sergeants with pristine uniforms and nervous expressions, and almost laughed. Of course we are. The next 3 weeks were a blur of interrogations, written statements, and legal consultations. Elena and Maya were confined to quarters pending investigation, their communications monitored, their movements restricted. Every meal was eaten under supervision. Every conversation was potentially recorded. The charges, when they came, were exactly what Elena had expected. Willful disobedience of a lawful order, conduct prejudicial to good order and discipline, failure to comply with direct communications from a superior officer. Each charge carried the potential for dishonorable discharge, forfeiture of pay, and imprisonment. The Reyes sisters had saved 1,000 Marines, and now the Marine Corps was preparing to destroy them for it. The lawyer assigned to their defense was a young captain named Sarah Hartwell, a JAG officer with sharp eyes and an impressive collection of trial victories on her record. Let me be clear about what you're facing. Hartwell said during their first meeting, the prosecution has a straightforward case. The order was lawful. You heard the order. You disobeyed the order. Everything else, the tactical situation, the lives you saved, your father's history, is just background noise unless we can reframe the entire narrative. What does reframe mean? Maya asked. It means we need to argue that the order itself was fundamentally flawed, that following would have resulted in the deaths of 1,000 Marines, and that you, as trained scouts, had the situational awareness to recognize this, that your disobedience was not reckless insubordination, but rather the exercise of military judgment in a deteriorating tactical environment. Will that work? Elena asked. Hartwell was silent for a moment. I don't know. Courts-martial are unpredictable. The panel will be career officers, most of whom have followed orders they disagree with their entire careers. You're asking them to validate disobedience. That goes against everything they've ever been taught. So we're going to prison. Not necessarily. Okonkwo leaned forward. There's something else working in your favor. The men and women you saved, they're talking. Emails, phone calls, interviews with the base newspaper. Hartwell himself has written a formal statement supporting your actions. The narrative is building, whether command likes it or not. By the time this case goes to trial, every Marine in the Corps is going to know the name's Reyes. The trial was scheduled for 4 weeks later, to be held at Camp Pendleton before a panel of 5 senior officers. In the interim, Elena and Maya remained confined, watched, and isolated. But Okonkwo was right. The narrative was building. It started with the Marines from 2nd Battalion, 8th Marines, soldiers who'd been trapped in that basin, who'd watched their brothers and sisters die under mortar fire, who had been certain they were going to die themselves. They wrote letters. They recorded video testimonials. They contacted their congressman. The story spread beyond the battalion. Other Marines heard about the 2 sisters who'd refused to abandon their own. Other units heard about the snipers who'd held a ridgeline alone against 300 fighters. Other families heard about the women who'd done what the Corps wouldn't do, who'd chosen loyalty over protocol. By the time the trial began, the base newspaper had published 3 articles. 2 national outlets had picked up the story. A hashtag had started trending. This is both helpful and dangerous. Okonkwo warned them the night before opening statements. Public support can influence outcomes, but it can also make command dig in. No one wants to look like they're capitulating to pressure. So what do? We tell the truth. All of it. Your father, your decision-making process, your intent. We let the panel see who you are, not just what you did, but why you did it. And we hope that's enough. The courtroom at Camp Pendleton was stark and functional. White walls, fluorescent lights, an American flag hanging limply beside the Marine Corps banner. Elena and Maya sat at the defense table in their dress blues, ribbons aligned, faces composed. The prosecution went first. Major William Drake was a career JAG officer with the demeanor of a man who'd never lost a case and didn't intend to start. He presented the facts with clinical precision. The order, the transmission logs, the acknowledgments from other Overwatch teams. The order was clear, Drake concluded. The order was lawful. Every other sniper team complied with that order. Only the defendants chose to ignore it. Only the defendants decided that their judgment superseded that of their commanding officers. The Marine Corps cannot function if individual soldiers are permitted to pick and choose which orders they follow. When it was Okonkwo's turn, she did something unexpected. She didn't dispute the facts. She didn't argue technicalities or jurisdiction. She called Lieutenant Colonel James Hartwell to the stand. Hartwell walked a witness chair with the bearing of a man who'd spent 30 years commanding Marines. He placed his hand on the Bible. He swore to tell the truth. Colonel Hartwell, Okonkwo began, "You were in command of the forces trapped in the Karengal Basin. Is that correct?" "It is." "When command issued the withdrawal order to Overwatch assets, what was your tactical assessment?" Hartwell's jaw tightened. "My assessment was that withdrawal would result in the destruction of my battalion." A murmur rippled through the courtroom. The panel officers leaned forward. "Can you elaborate?" "We were facing a superior force in prepared positions with no air support and limited ammunition. The mortar bombardment had already caused significant casualties. If the enemy had pressed their assault during the hours that the Overwatch positions were unmanned, we would have been overrun. There's no other way to describe it. And when you learned that Staff Sergeant Reyes and Sergeant Reyes had remained on station despite the withdrawal order, what was your reaction?" Hartwell was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was raw. "I thank God, because I knew that as long as those 2 women were on that ridge, my Marines had a chance." The room was absolutely silent. "Colonel Hartwell, in your professional opinion, should Staff Sergeant Reyes and Sergeant Reyes be convicted of disobedience?" Major Drake shot to his feet. "Objection. The witness is not qualified to render legal opinions." "Overruled," the presiding officer said. "The witness may answer regarding his military judgment." Hartwell looked directly at Elena and Maya. His eyes were bright with something that might have been tears. "In my opinion, these 2 Marines should receive medals, not courts-martial. They did what every Marine promises to do on the day they earn the Eagle, Globe, and Anchor. They refuse to leave their brothers and sisters behind. If that's a crime, then I'm guilty of it too. The prosecution tried to recover. Drake called communication officers who confirmed the clarity of the withdrawal order. He called intelligence analysts who defended their flawed assessments. He called staff officers who testified that proper protocol required compliance with superior orders. But the damage was done. When Elena took the stand, Okonkwo walked her through every moment of that night. The decision to turn off the radio, the split to separate positions, the hours of precision fire that had kept the enemy at bay. Staff Sergeant Reyes, why did you disobey the order? Elena looked at the panel. 5 officers who would decide her fate. 4 men, 1 woman. All of them career Marines. All of them trained to follow orders without question. Because I've seen what happens when Marines are abandoned, she said. My father was Gunnery Sergeant Miguel Reyes. In 2007, he was killed in the Tangi Valley during an operation that went wrong. Command ordered withdrawal before extraction was complete. My father died waiting for helicopters that never came. The silence was absolute. I don't know if the officers who made that decision sleep well at night. I don't know what they think about the 6 Marines who died in that valley. But I think about them every day. I think about my father lying in the rocks, watching the sky, hoping that someone would come for him. Her voice cracked. She steadied herself. When I heard the withdrawal order in the Karenga Basin, I saw my father's face in every one of those Marines. I saw his fear in their fear, his hope in their hope. And I knew in my bones that if I left that ridge, I would be complicit in their deaths. I would become the officer who abandoned them. So you chose to disobey. I chose to be a Marine. The Marine I promised to be. The Marine my father was. The panel deliberated for 3 days. 3 days during which Elena and Maya waited in their quarters, not speaking, barely eating, watching the hours crawl past. 3 days during which the entire Marine Corps seemed to hold its breath. When the verdict came, it was delivered in the same stark courtroom where the trial had been held. Elena and Maya stood at attention as a presiding officer, a colonel with silver hair and a chest full of ribbons, read from a prepared statement. Staff Sergeant Elena Reyes. Sergeant Maya Reyes. This panel has carefully considered the evidence presented, the testimony offered, and the unique circumstances of this case. Elena felt her heart pounding in her throat. On the charge of willful disobedience of a lawful order, this panel finds the defendants guilty. The word hit like a physical blow. Guilty. After everything, guilty. On the charge of conduct prejudicial to good order and discipline, this panel finds the defendants guilty. Maya's hand found Elena's. They gripped each other tightly, bracing for the rest. However, the colonel continued, this panel recognizes that guilt under the letter of military law does not capture the full scope of the defendant's actions. We find that Staff Sergeant Reyes and Sergeant Reyes acted with heroic intent in a deteriorating tactical environment, and that their disobedience, while technically criminal, resulted in the preservation of approximately 1,000 American lives. Therefore, sentencing will be as follows. Time served. No further punishment will be imposed. Additionally, this panel recommends a formal review of the abandonment protocol that led to the initial withdrawal order. The defendants are hereby released from confinement. The gavel fell. Elena couldn't move, couldn't breathe. It was over, and they were still Marines. The aftermath unfolded in ways Elena hadn't anticipated. The formal review of abandonment protocol that the panel had recommended became a reality within weeks. A board of senior officers was convened to examine the decision-making process that had led to withdrawal order in the Karenga Basin. The board's findings were damning. Intelligence failures, communication breakdowns, an over-reliance on satellite imagery without ground confirmation, a command structure that prioritized acceptable losses over human initiative. The board recommended 18 specific changes to protocol, including new standards for issuing withdrawal orders, enhanced communication requirements for Overwatch assets, and expanded authority for field commanders to countermand orders based on ground-level assessment. Hartwell was promoted to full colonel. Captain Chun was reassigned to a desk job in Washington. The generals who had issued the withdrawal order faced no formal discipline, But their careers quietly stalled. Elena and Maya returned to duty, assigned to a sniper training battalion at Camp Lejeune. They taught marksmanship, tactical movement, and the mathematics of long-range shooting. But the story didn't end there. 6 months after the trial, Elena received a letter marked official business. Inside was a single sheet of paper bearing the Marine Corps seal. Staff Sergeant Elena Reyes is hereby awarded the Bronze Star with Valor Device for extraordinary heroism in combat operations in Karengal Province, Afghanistan. The ceremony was held at Quantico. Elena and Maya stood side by side, while a general pinned medals to their chests. The auditorium was packed with Marines, some who'd been in the basin that night, some who'd only heard the story, all of them watching as two sisters received formal recognition for the act of disobedience that had saved a battalion. After the ceremony, Hartwell found them. "I have something for you," he said, pressing a folded flag into Elena's hands. "This was your father's. I requested it from the archives after the trial. I thought you should have it." Elena looked at the flag. The stars and stripes that had draped her father's coffin, now worn with age but still perfect in its folds. "How did you?" "I made some calls. Your father was a hero too, Staff Sergeant. The Corps failed him, but you made sure the Corps didn't fail us." Elena held the flag against her chest, feeling the fabric against her fingers, feeling the weight of everything it represented. "Thank you, sir." "No." Hartwell shook his head. "Thank you, both of you." He saluted. Elena and Maya returned the salute. And for a moment, standing there in dress blues with medals on their chests and their father's flag in their hands, they felt something they hadn't felt in years. Peace. The night after the ceremony, Elena and Maya drove to Arlington. The cemetery was closed to visitors, but their credentials got them past the gates. They walked the quiet roads in darkness, following paths they knew by heart, until they reached a simple white stone. Gunnery Sergeant Miguel Angel Reyes, United States Marine Corps, beloved father and hero. Elena knelt beside the grave. Maya stood behind her, one hand on her sister's shoulder. "We did it, Dad," Elena whispered. "We brought them home." The wind whispered through the trees. Somewhere distant, a car passed on a highway beyond the cemetery walls. But here, in the small circle of white stones, there was only silence. "I know you're proud of us," Elena continued. "I know you had done the same thing. I know." Her voice broke. She pressed her forehead against the cold stone. "I know you never stopped fighting, even at the end, even when they left you behind." Maya's hand tightened on her shoulder. "We're not going to let it happen again," Elena said. "Not on our watch. Not ever." They stayed until dawn. As the first light crept over the horizon, casting long shadows across the endless rows of white stones, Elena stood. She folded her father's flag and pressed it against her heart one last time. Then she and Maya walked out of the cemetery, out of the past, and into whatever came next. Epilogue. 1 year later, the Marine Corps published a new tactical manual titled Adaptive Command Protocols in Deteriorating Combat Environments. Chapter 7 was called The Reyes Doctrine, a formal acknowledgement that field operatives with superior situational awareness could exercise independent judgment in extreme circumstances. The chapter included a quote from the court-martial panel's findings. "Sometimes a mission is not found in the orders we receive, but in the oath we swore." The Reyes sisters exemplified this truth under the most extreme conditions imaginable. Elena and Maya read the chapter together, sitting on the roof of their barracks at Camp Lejeune, watching the sun set over North Carolina. "The Reyes Doctrine," Maya said, testing the words. "Sounds pretty official. Sounds like something Dad would have laughed about." "Yeah." Maya smiled. "He definitely would have." They sat in comfortable silence as the sky shifted from orange to purple to deep blue. Stars began to emerge. The same stars that had watched over that frozen ridge in Afghanistan. The same stars that their father had seen in his final moments. "You ever think about what would have happened?" Maya asked. "If we'd followed the order?" "Every day." And Elena looked at her sister. "And I'm glad we didn't find out." The stars continued to emerge, one by one, until the sky was filled with light. Below them, the base hummed with activity. Marines training, vehicles moving, the endless rhythm of military life. But up here on the roof, there was only the two of them. "Hey, Elena?" "Yeah. Thanks for not making me do it alone." Elena reached over and took her sister's hand, their fingers intertwined, familiar and strong. "We're Rhea's women," she said. "We don't do anything alone." Maya laughed, a real laugh, full of warmth and release. Elena joined her, and for a moment, the weight of everything they'd been through lifted. The guilt, the fear, the courtroom, the judgment, all of it fell away. They were Marines. They were sisters. They were survivors. And they were home. 3 miles of frozen ridgeline. 2 sisters with rifles. One impossible decision. In the end, the numbers didn't matter. The tactics didn't matter. The court-martial didn't matter. What mattered was this. When command said leave them, Elena and Maya Reyes said no. And because they said no, 1,000 Marines went home to their families. Not all heroism is recognized immediately. Sometimes it takes courts, controversies, and the passage of time before the truth emerges. But the truth always emerges. In the years that followed, Elena and Maya became instructors, not just of marksmanship, but of something harder to define. They taught judgment. They taught instinct. They taught the kind of moral courage that couldn't be found in any manual. Your orders are important, Elena would tell her students, standing before rows of young Marines eager to prove themselves. But they're not the end. They're the beginning. Every order is a tool to accomplish a mission. If the tool fails, you don't abandon the mission. You find another way. Even if it costs you your career, a private asked once, especially then. Elena's eyes met the young Marines. Your career isn't the mission. Your career is just how long you get to serve. The mission is why you serve. And why you serve, that's for you to decide. The young Marine nodded slowly, something clicking into place behind his eyes. It was in moments like that, watching understanding dawn on a face that reminded her of her own at that age, that Elena felt closest to her father. He'd been a teacher, too, in his way. He'd taught her how to shoot, how to move, how to read terrain. But more than that, he'd taught her how to be a Marine, not through words, but through example, through the way he treated his subordinates, his superiors, his family, through the way he shouldered responsibility and accepted consequences, through the way he loved the Corps without ever letting that love blind him to its failures. The Corps isn't perfect, he'd told her once, cleaning his rifle on the back porch of their Virginia home. It's made of people, and people make mistakes. Sometimes big mistakes, sometimes fatal ones. Then why do you stay? 14-year-old Elena had asked. Because the Corps is also capable of being better. And every Marine who stays, who fights for that better version, they make it possible. What if you fight and it doesn't get better? Her father had looked at her with those steady brown eyes that she'd inherited. Then you fight anyway, because that's what Marines do. Those words had stayed with Elena through everything. Boot camp, sniper school, deployment after deployment, the frozen ridge, the courtroom. They'd been with her when she turned off her radio. They'd been with her when she watched 1,000 Marines march into a kill zone. They'd been with her when she decided that being a Marine meant more than following orders. They were with her now, standing in a classroom full of young faces, carrying on the work her father had started. Staff Sergeant Reyes? Elena blinked, returning to the present. The private who'd asked about career consequences was looking at her expectantly. Yes, Private? What happened to the men who gave the withdrawal order? The ones who decided to abandon the battalion? Elena considered the question carefully. It was a fair one, and the answer wasn't simple. Some of them retired. Some of them were reassigned. None of them faced courts-martial. She paused, letting that sink in. The system protects itself. It always has. That's not cynicism. That's reality. You can rage against it, or you can accept it and work within its constraints to make change where you can. But that's not fair. No, it's not. Elena's voice was even. Fairness is a concept. Reality is what you have to deal with. And in reality, you don't get to choose what happens to other people. You only get to choose what happens to you. The class was silent. 30 pairs of eyes watched her, absorbing words that would stay with them through deployments they couldn't yet imagine. Any other questions? A female corporal in the second row raised her hand. Staff Sergeant, is it true that your father was abandoned by command during an operation? Elena felt a familiar tightness in her chest, the old wound that would never fully heal. Yes. Is that why you did what you did in the Karengal Basin? Partly. Elena moved to the window, looking out at the training field where Marines practice combat drills under the Carolina sun. I'd like to say it was purely tactical, that I made a cold calculation based on operational factors and determined that disobeying was a strategically superior option, but that would be a lie. She turned back to face the class. The truth is, when I heard that withdrawal order, I saw my father. I saw him waiting in the rocks, bleeding out, watching the sky. I saw him hoping that someone would come. And I couldn't be the person who didn't come. I couldn't add 1,000 more faces to the ones I already see in my dreams. The corporal nodded slowly. So you're saying emotions played a role. I'm saying emotions always play a role. Anyone who tells you they make decisions in combat purely based on logic is either lying or they've never been in real combat. The key isn't eliminating emotion. That's impossible. The key is understanding your emotions well enough to know when they're helping you and when they're compromising your judgment. How do you know the difference? Practice. Elena smiled slightly, and a lot of mistakes. The class laughed, a release of tension that Elena had learned to cultivate. Heavy lessons needed light moments, or they became unbearable. All right, that's enough philosophy for one day. Let's get back to ballistics. Open your manuals to Chapter 14. We're going to talk about crosswind compensation at extended ranges. The class dutifully opened their manuals, and Elena returned to the familiar comfort of mathematics. Distances, velocities, atmospheric conditions, the clean, quantifiable variables that she spent her life mastering. But even as she taught, part of her mind remained on that frozen ridge. It always did. It probably always would. Some experiences don't end when they're over. They become part of you, woven into the fabric of who you are. The Karengal Basin was like that for Elena. The cold, the fear, the weight of responsibility, the sight of 1,000 Marines fighting for their lives in a frozen kill zone, and the moment when she decided that being a Marine meant more than obeying orders. That moment had defined her. It had cost her nearly everything, her career, her freedom, her peace of mind. But it had also given her something she'd been searching for since childhood. Purpose. Not the abstract purpose that recruiting posters promised. Not the ceremonial purpose of medals and parades. Real purpose. The kind that came from knowing with absolute certainty that you'd done the right thing. That you'd been a Marine you promised to be. That night, after classes ended and the barracks emptied, Elena drove to the beach near Camp Lejeune. Maya was waiting, sitting on the hood of their shared pickup truck, watching the waves roll in. Long day? Maya asked as Elena climbed up beside her. They're all long days. But good. Elena considered the question. Yeah, good. They sat in silence, listening to the rhythm of the ocean. Above them, stars were beginning to appear, the same stars that had watched over them in Afghanistan, in Arlington, in every moment of their intertwined lives. I got an email from Hartwell today. Maya said after a while, yeah, he's retiring. Full honors. They're doing a ceremony at Quantico next month. We should go. I already RSVP'd for both of us. Elena smiled. Of course she had. He asked about you, Maya continued. Wanted to know how the teaching was going. If you were happy. What did you tell him? I told him you were exactly where you were supposed to be. Elena turned to look at her sister, her partner, her best friend, the person who'd stood beside her on that frozen ridge, and every day since. And what about you? Elena asked, are you where you're supposed to be? Maya was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was soft. I spent years trying to escape Dad's shadow, trying to prove I was my own person, not just Miguel Reyes's daughter. But now, she trailed off, searching for words. Now I think the shadow was never a problem. The problem was thinking I had to escape it. What changed? The basin changed. Standing on that ridge, making that choice, I realized I wasn't escaping Dad's legacy. I was continuing it. I was adding to it. Maya looked at Elena. We're not shadows, Elena. We're light. The same light Dad carried, passed down to us. Elena felt tears prick her eyes. She blinked them back, but they came anyway. When did you get so wise? I've always been wise. You were just too busy being the older sister to notice. Elena laughed, a wet, emotional sound that released something she hadn't known she was holding. I love you, Maya. I know. Maya bumped her shoulder against Elena's. I love you too. They stayed on that beach until the moon rose and the tide came in, lapping at the sand just below their feet. They talked about their father, about the past, about the future. They planned trips they'd never take and laughed at jokes only they understood. And when dawn finally came, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, they drove back to base together, ready for another day, another lesson, another chance to pass on the things they'd learned. Because that was what Marines did. They adapted, they overcame, and they brought their people home, even when command said otherwise. Final reflections. Years later, historians would debate the significance of what became known as the Korengal Incident. Some call it a turning point in military doctrine, the moment when the Marine Corps formally acknowledged that field judgment sometimes superseded chain of command. Others dismissed it as an anomaly, a one-time exception that proved the rule of strict obedience. But for the 1,000 Marines who'd been trapped in that frozen basin, there was no debate. For them, there were only 2 women on a ridge, 2 sisters who refused to abandon them. The names Reyes became legend in the Corps, not the kind of legend that gets printed in textbooks or celebrated at official ceremonies, but the kind that passes from Marine to Marine in quiet moments, in barracks late at night, in foxholes and outposts and the backs of transport aircraft. The story changed in the telling, as stories always do. Some versions had Elena killing 50 enemy fighters with 50 shots. Some versions had Maya holding off an entire company single-handed. Some versions mixed the sisters together until they became a single mythical figure, the ghost of Korengal, the sniper who stayed. Elena and Maya never corrected the myths. What mattered wasn't the details. It was the truth beneath them, the truth that when it mattered most, 2 Marines had chosen their brothers and sisters over their orders. That was a truth worth remembering, worth passing on, worth living by. Lieutenant Colonel Hartwell died 7 years after the basin, peaceful in his sleep at the age of 60. His funeral was attended by 3,000 Marines. Every rank, every background, united in respect for a commander who'd never forgotten what leadership meant. Elena gave a eulogy. James Hartwell was the kind of officer every Marine deserves but few get, she said, standing before the crowd with her sister beside her. He didn't lead from behind a desk. He led from the front, carrying the weight of every decision, feeling the cost of every loss. When the basin seemed lost, he kept fighting. When my sister and I disobeyed orders to save his Marines, he stood beside us. He never forgot what the Corps is supposed to be. She paused, looking at the flag-draped coffin. And because of him, neither will I. After the funeral, Elena and Maya returned to Virginia. They stood before their father's grave one more time, and Elena placed Hartwell's challenge coin on the white stone, a final tribute to 2 warriors who'd never met but shared the same spirit. They would have liked each other, Maya said. Yeah. Elena touched the cold stone. They would have. The sun was setting as they left Arlington for the last time. Elena was 63 now, retired, her shooting days behind her. Maya was 61, teaching tactical medicine at Johns Hopkins. They'd given everything to the Corps, and the Corps had given them everything in return. Purpose, brotherhood, a family forged in fire, and the knowledge, carved deep into their souls, that they'd made a difference. What happens now? Maya asked as they drove past the cemetery gates. Elena smiled, the same smile she'd worn on that frozen ridge, when disobedience became duty and duty became destiny. Now we live, she said. We tell the stories. We remember the ones we lost and celebrate the ones we saved. And we make sure that when the next generation faces a Korengal, they know what we knew. What's that? Elena reached over and took her sister's hand. That being a Marine isn't about following orders. It's about becoming the kind of person who knows when to follow them and when not to. The highways stretch before them. leading toward a future neither could see, but both were ready to face. Behind them, the graves of Arlington stood silent beneath the darkening sky. 1,000 Marines had come home because 2 sisters refused to leave. And that was a story worth telling. Forever. The end. This story shows us what happens when loyalty outweighs orders. If this kept you engaged, hit that like button. Tell me in the comments, would you have made the same choice, defying a direct order to save your fellow Marines? Subscribe if you haven't already. More stories like this are coming. See you in the next one.